So welcome back to the Raisina Dialogue, and this time we have a very important conversation with arguably the most powerful military commander in the world, Admiral Phil Davidson, who's been a great friend of the Raisina Dialogue, and of course someone who's working very closely with his Indian counterparts, Japanese counterparts, and other countries in the region to put together a framework that will allow us peace, prosperity, and stability in this particular region. Welcome to the Raisina Dialogue, Admiral.
Thank you very much, Samir. It's a great pleasure to be joining the Raisina Dialogue and to see you again. Thank you.
Admiral, I would have loved to receive you in Delhi. I mentioned that to you, but we meet in interesting times. The pandemic has ravaged the world. And of course, it would not be amiss to ask, how did this affect the Indo-Pacific Command, your folks, your hardware, your people, your software, your readiness, your resilience? What does it really mean for a military to respond to a pandemic of this scale? How were your operational levels? We heard stories in India, but I would want to hear from you. Pandemic and the military, how did that play out?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question, Samir. You know, a challenge really for everyone on the planet. You know, our approach at the outset really pursued three priorities. You know, first, to ensure the health of our soldiers, sailor, airmen, Marines, Coast Guardsmen, and Guardians in all the forces. Second, to make sure that we approached our readiness needs with an eye towards both the short-term needs, but without forgetting the long-term needs as well. And then third was to be able to prepare the force to support the nation's whole of government effort inside the United States, our territories as well in the region, and to be prepared in the long term to assist others if needed. And really, in all three aspects, things bore out during the course of the last 13 months or so. You know, to begin, we followed very closely the CDC guidelines, worked across the United States government on what those health mitigations might be for the force. A lot of learning within the force over the course of the whole year, very, very important. And I think we were also able to lend expertise to other nations as well. Secondly, when it came to the readiness concerns, you know, we really had to take an eye towards our allies and partners, given the fact that Indo-Pacific Command is so deeply collaborative in terms of exercise, training, operations with other countries. We had to work quite closely with them to make sure that we understood their own guidelines, what some of the mitigation effects, mitigation needs were in some of those countries. And ultimately, it led us to cancel many exercises and activities, postpone certainly, modify, which was actually the thing that happened most extensively with our partners and allies, and things like that. And then third, of course, we had to be prepared to help others, and we did so. Dispatching both National Guard forces and active duty forces in some cases throughout the United States. I think that's pretty well reported, but also in some of our Pacific territories as well. We'll have to continue to maintain this kind of approach, I believe. Certainly try to continue to mitigate the effects, and in my view, be ready to help others on the globe. I think two other things I should add kind of quickly to this. You know, one of the things that our armed forces and U.S. government did was to lend aid and support to other countries in the region. That took the form of helping to provide funds that could build emergency facilities, you know, hospital expansions, that kind of thing. We also went as far as shipping some ventilators by U.S. Air Force aircraft around the region, things like that. You know, so I think that's a very important effort. Second is retaining and the understanding and doing what I call the prudent thinking about how we might support others on the planet when it comes to vaccine distribution, should it be necessary. The COVAX initiative, I think you've seen announced. In case there was any, we're wrapping our head around that. The headquarters want to be prepared to help out if it's necessary.
Admiral, we invite various of our various stakeholders, audiences to pose questions to our very special guests, such as yourself. And one of the questions coincides with what I wanted to ask you, so it's going to get a fair bit of play here. A gentleman by the name of Varun Patel actually asks you that post this normalization of the Quad by the leaders of the Quad, at the summit level. What are your thoughts on the future of this grouping, and what is the challenge for democracies in dealing with a certain kind of aggression that is beginning to get overwhelming in this part of the world? And of course, Varun also wants to know, in your assessment, India's role in all of this.
Yeah, I think the Quad is an exceptional opportunity. Not only for our own four nations, the United States, India, Japan, and Australia, but really what it means to the principles of a free and open Indo-Pacific. In addition to that, it is, I think, a grouping that comes together, what I've called a Diamond of Democracies. Mm-hmm. That if you think about it, the enormous change going on across the globe, the opportunity that's before us when we think about those shared values, the mutual interests, the common economic concerns that we might have, to think beyond just a security focus and think about an opportunity focus going forward. So when we think about things like AI and 5G, when we think about the future of the global economy, when we think about the ability to come together to assist others in a free and open Indo-Pacific, it's a really powerful grouping that I think, to use my phrase, in the formation of a Diamond of Democracies coming together, sets an example and can lead the world on issues that are challenging.
So, Admiral, let me be a little naughty and ask you another direct question. You've sometimes you would have read recently some folks describing Quad as the Asian NATO. What are your thoughts on being described as an Asian NATO?
Yeah, it's, oftentimes I think that's a little bit unfortunate, right? NATO is a long-standing alliance, really born from a strategic threat, manifest in Eastern Europe at the time, with the Soviets. In my view, when we talk about the Quad, we're talking about opportunity and really, the ability to come together, not out of concern over, only or solely a security threat, but actually looking at the opportunities that democracies can bring together when it comes to the global economy, when it comes to the values that our democracies have upheld for its people, and what that opportunity could be when we're grouped together. I often think that people, when they speak about a security grouping, a security alliance like NATO, are trying to undermine the important opportunity that's before the Quad nations itself.
So, Admiral, I have three more questions for you. I promise you the last one would be a little tricky, but the first two I think are something that all of us would like to know, because you have served on this command for a while and you have been instrumental in many changes. I would like to know from you that possibly in the last 3 years, what has been most satisfying for you as part of your job? Some accomplishments, some major developments. What has satisfied you most as the commander of the Indo-Pacific Command?
Well, that's a tough question, Samir. I guess I'd say three things here. First one, it is clear to me that there is a strategic threat to all nations in the region. And as we've seen the People's Republic of China's approach to Xinjiang, to Hong Kong, to Tibet, to the line of actual control with India, things like that. I think a clear articulation of that would be one of the things that I think the headquarters, and I have to really, lend my thanks and acknowledgement to the hardworking people at Indo-Pacific Command and all the components there who've done all the important headwork here. But in this first regard, it's come about, I think, in the form of the Pacific Deterrence Initiative in the United States. A fund directly formulated to address those strategic concerns. And I would say regionally, that clear articulation of the threat has found its way to a relatively common dialogue across all our allies and partners in the region. Secondly, I think what we've done is we've articulated a strategy to think about how the joint nature of the U.S. Armed Forces would come together to deter on a day-to-day basis, but if called upon to fight. And that's always an ongoing challenge and effort, and we need to continue to stay after that. But we've articulated a joint framework that I think is really important to our Indo-Pacific approach. And then lastly, I would say our engagement with allies and partners in the region. There's no doubt it's been challenged by the COVID environment, but we've managed to work in virtual constructs. We've managed to sustain a lot of our engagements to have an understanding of the power that international community that is focused on supporting the kind of interests, shared values that a free and open Indo-Pacific describes, and to work together for common purpose. I've been, quite enthused about the return of a formation like the Quad. The nation's approach on Oceania and the Pacific Island chain, and our belief and our approach that ASEAN should be at the center of our vision for a free and open Indo-Pacific and the center of our engagements. And I think the headquarters and my components have actually had a good job, have done a good job in approaching our allies and partners in that way. So thank you for the question, Samir. It's a time of reflection for me personally as I get close to the end, and that's a way to help kind of think about what the approach in the region has been. So thank you.
Admiral, you mentioned China. So following up on your recent testimony before the Senate, for our audiences here, in your estimation, how real is the nature of the Chinese threat? What are the chances of China becoming an overwhelming force in the very near future?
Yeah, well, I thank you for mentioning the testimony. I was pretty clear there. I think the threat is manifest within this decade. And I think I was even more specific than that, saying I think it could come about within the next 6 years. That's not to say that I believe the threat is 6 years away. I worry about the threat as it's manifest in the region today. There's no better example than the tensions that have been manifest along the line of actual control itself. So this decade, I think, is very, very important for the international community. And it's why I keep talking about the importance of a free and open Indo-Pacific. Coming together in that manner, and the moniker free and open, I think, is all too important for nations that are like-minded, have mutual security concerns, a nearly common set of values, and the economic interests in the region should be working together to oppose someone who would impose a closed and authoritarian internal nature of their own governance system onto the international community. One doesn't need to look any farther than what's been going on in Xinjiang to think about what might happen in the international community should China continue to look outward. We need to pay attention to this threat closely. And when I say we, I mean the international community